Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Now, following the economic downturn resulting in the devaluation of the naira and skyrocketing inflation, it was apparent to everyone in Nigeria that its workers could no longer survive on the national minimum wage of 18,000 naira per month. And as workers' disposable income shrank and living standards plummeted, it was only a matter of time before the labor unions started to agitate for an increase in the national minimum wage. However, getting the Nigerian government to the negotiating table was no mean task. And after months of agitation, the federal government eventually set up a committee comprising its officials and representatives of the labor unions to negotiate a new national minimum wage. Hopes were high amongst labor leaders that they would come away with a wage that Nigerian workers could live with. But after intense negotiations with the federal government, they settled at 30,000 naira as the new national minimum wage. Now, to put this in perspective, 30,000 naira translates to $98 a month, or slightly over $3 a day. Now, if we have to use the official exchange rate of 305 naira to $1. Nonetheless, getting the federal government to send a bill to the National Assembly to legislate on the new minimum wage that will be binding on the federal, states and local government proved to be a tall order. And it took for the unions led by the Nigeria Labour Congress, the NLC, to embark on a nationwide protest last Tuesday before the government caved in and committed to sending a bill to the 30,000 naira national minimum wage to the National Assembly on or before January the 23rd. And as part of the process for the submission of the bill, President Muhammadu Buhari has inaugurated an advisory technical committee that will propose a work plan and modalities for the implementation of the new salaries for Nigerian workers. Now, joining us this morning to speak on this and other issues pertinent to the livelihoods of the country's workers is the President of the United Labour Congress, the ULC, Comrade Joe Ajaero. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. Now, first, it was the tripartite committee formed, and then eventually what we're seeing now is the advisory technical committee headed by Bismarck Rewane. How did you receive this development?
Well, I think the advisory committee set up by Mr. President is personal to him. Ordinarily, one should have expected him to have that committee even before the inauguration of the tripartite committee. However, if he decides to have thousands of committees to advise him, I think he's welcomed. I want to leave it at that point. The labor unions, the organized labor, we don't have any business with the Bismarck committee. And I don't know what that Bismarck committee is all about. If he had added this in the budget, and it's contained in the budget, the payment of minimum wage, and in the negotiation, we have agreed on 30,000. So whether the Bismarck committee is going to raise money for his payment or implementation is best known to him. So I needed to, let me stop there so far. So the labor unions are not part of the advisory committee or the Bismarck committee. I think that is a waste of time and energy, if you ask me.
Do you see this as a delayed tactic by the government, or do you perceive a sense of urgency from the government?
Well, I wouldn't say delayed tactics or sense of urgency. I'm seeing a situation whereby he wants Nigerians to believe that something is being done. When in actuality, you can't put a quantum of, let's say, 20 billion for minimum wage when you have not calculated what constitutes the minimum wage. What makes up the 20 billion. I'm using it as an example. So having projected this in the budget, and now you are bringing the Bismarck committee, to look at it, it seems something is wrong. Either the Minister of Finance and Budget are not doing their work, and maybe the Bismarck committee will now replace the functions of the budget office. So, but whatever, I don't think that has any bearing with us. And when initially, during the budget presentation, he said there was going to be a high technical committee to look into the process of implementation and all that. And we rejected it outrightly, that we are not part of that. Because you don't renegotiate a report of the tripartite committee. So whatever this committee is, I think Mr. President will tell Nigerians later.
Now, the current figure on the table is 30,000 naira a month. And as you heard from Friday's introduction, that works out to $98 US dollars a month.
About 83 or something like that.
Well, under $100 a month. Mm-hmm. At the official rate, it's $98 per month. This is low. How is it that the labor unions agreed to such a low compromise for the Nigerian workers?
Well, I don't think it's a low compromise to a very large extent, but it's just to start with. You know, if you watch where we are moving from 18,000 naira to 30,000 naira, at first we had a lot of presentation. You know, the organization that I had, we had 96,000 naira presentation. But when we started negotiating, you know, we discovered that minimum wage is not just for government alone. You know, the organized private sector under the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association came up with their own proposal to say that this business, that they must remain in business, at least for us to have members. They looked at the issue of electricity, you know, the ease of doing business, importation, that even the products imported or smuggled into the country go far lower than their own, cheaper than their own products. And for them to be protected, you know, it's better we allow them. You know, when you consider gas, diesel, all those, the cost of production. You know, so we looked at it and looked at minimum of 30,000. And minimum, for your own information, is the limit for which nobody should go beyond. It doesn't mean that people are not free to pay 100,000 as minimum wage. So having secured that 30,000 minimum wage, as industrial unions on sectoral basis are free to go back and negotiate from 30,000 up. You know, so it's not like the 30,000 is the ceiling. Having secured that from 18,000 to 30,000, so you discover in the next few months that all other companies or the workers in those sectors will start negotiating with a base of 30,000 naira. So that is what happened. And we needed to equally be careful in picking it at 30,000. So we're all aware that 30,000, it may be difficult for it to sustain a family of 6, you know, for a month. But we'll have to start somewhere.
All right. Besides the legislation being passed by the National Assembly now, that's the 30,000 naira minimum wage into law, how will you, your labor unions, guarantee that workers will get this money, that state government will actually be able to pay this money? Because as it is, only about 2 states have said they can afford to pay 30,000 minimum wage to their workers.
Well, I think from, if you go through the history of minimum wage in the country, it has never been easy. It's fought. You know, even when it was 125 in 1981, when it was 125 naira, you know, so we were expecting the same. You know, even the 18,000 was tug of war. When they increased it to 3,000, when Adams was there, there was nationwide strike almost everywhere. So we expect this to be in the same manner. You know, we're going to fight over it. However, in some states, you know, because the labor unions are structured, national state, and in some instances, in some states, where labor leaders are in the pockets of governors, it makes it difficult for you to implement such. But in some other states, you know, they are easily implemented. If you watch like what I was telling you before, when it was 18,000 naira, states like Edo were paying 25,000 minimum wage. States will still pay more than 30,000 naira, depending on how it is enforced. You know, I'm convinced that many states will pay because it is still not a living wage. And then if you look at all the indices, if state governments should equally close up all wastages, I think they will pay 30,000 or more.
But they insist that even with that, they will still not be able to afford this. They say there's paucity of funds. You are aware that the federal government has had to come to the state government's aid to pay salaries for quite a time now. Why is Labour refusing to reason with the governors? Why do you insist that there is no basis for not being able to pay 30,000 naira by the state government?
Well, if you don't pay even better wages, the economy will not move. You know, if there's no wage in circulation, if the worker doesn't collect better wage, he will not buy he will not go to the market. And if he's not going to the market, that economy will not revolve. If you, as of today, we say there's no salary paid and the governors are keeping all the money or in the bank and there's no money in circulation, the economy cannot move. So it is only when you pay and people use that same money to buy. If you watch any payday, you see what is happening in the market, that the economy can even move. But I think beyond that, you know, the governors are not getting their priority right at all, especially towards election. You see people, you know, spending on areas that are not necessary. If they have looked at key areas and they invest in such areas, the economy will automatically move. And it appears some states may not be viable, and I think we need to come back to the basis of our federalism. You know, those states that you know that are not viable, that can't even, you know, generate 1 naira, then you can merge them with other states. But there are states, as of today, even from tax, you know, some of them that are not even oil-producing states are doing better. You know, you can look at comparative analysis, the states that are oil-producing states and the states that are not oil-producing states. Based on what they are doing to generate revenue, they will make more money. So if you are there and you reduce yourself to a rentiering state, you go to the federation account, they give you 20 naira, you spend it, then there's no way you can pay. So some other states, when they meet with this, when they are faced with this challenge, you know, will look for how to raise resources, how to raise funds for the state, and they will pay. You know, and I think it's doable. This amount is doable.
When the minimum wage is increased, it doesn't affect just the workers. It will affect pensions and gratuities. Don't you think that this is more pressure? And again, you talk about wastages by the state government. Labour has even asked for them to bring their books to the table to be investigated. But what areas would Labour like to see this frivolous expenditure, like you refer to them as? What areas should be curtailed? What are these frivolous expenditures the state governments are spending money on?
Let's look at a duplication of the personnel costs. You want to appoint a press secretary. Let me use that. And you have Ministry of Information with all those press officials. Then you move out to appoint a press secretary, chief press secretary, the assistant press secretary. Then other officials, the commissioners, all of them, they appoint this. Whereas from the state ministries, where these people are already earning salaries, you know, you can second staff from such areas, you know, and reduce that area of wastage. If you check even their seats, where they sit, you see this Nigerian coat of arms. Do you know how much it costs to print all those things they are sitting on? And then you look at the fleet of cars attached to all officials. The commissioner for this, commissioner for... Somebody may be using 8, 9 vehicles, whereas he's going to stay in one. And that's how we are going to have, you know, special advisor this, special assistant this, all those, even on personnel cost alone.
In other words, cost of governance.
Yes. Even on that alone, if you reduce it, you know, you have a lot to save for the country. And then let me say this, award of contracts. You know, for a long time now, growing up, some of us knew what the Public Works Department were doing before they changed to Ministry of Works. You know, road maintenance, everything. Those people are still working. The number of engineers you have in the Ministries of Works are so many, more competent than the private construction companies. But you award those contracts to those private companies, yet you have engineers in your payroll. I'm telling you that it doesn't cost much, you know, for those engineers, you know, to come out and work. In most instances, when you award this contract, the contractors still go to the ministry to take engineers to do these works. If we look at this and ascertain them very well, and do real forensic audit, you discover that we have more money in the system.
So what do you attribute the remaining, or sort of the strain between Labour and government now? Because you're saying, raising these important points, the presidency is responding. There was that meeting on January 4th in which you were conspicuously absent. Why was it that, you're smiling, why were you and the leadership of the ULC, why did you decide to boycott the meeting? Why are you not interested in dialogue?
Well, at that point, when we met last December, we gave 31st deadline to transmit the bill to the National Assembly. And that was our last meeting for the year. The basis for the meeting again with Mr. President or the Minister of Labor to renegotiate or look at what has been agreed upon before wasn't in the calculation of the ULC. We were only interested in those activities that will make the government, to pass this law. And by the time they went for that meeting again, my colleagues went for that meeting again, the best they got was 23rd, for Mr. President to transmit it to National Assembly. And you ask yourself, from November to 23rd of January, why will it take that long to just transmit it for the National Assembly to change 18,000 to 30,000? That's what they expected. And from 4th again, it would still take them up to 23rd. And if National Assembly reconvenes on 23rd, within 2 weeks or so, they will go on recess for them to go into electioneering. And you start to wonder whether they can finish this work before election or not. So those are the issues that from the ULC we are raising that are critical issues, that there was no basis. That if Mr. President wants to send a bill today, he can do it, and we didn't understand the basis for 2020.
So you're not assuaged in any way by the transmission or the proposal to transmit the bill on or before the 23rd?
Oh, the 23rd will
and the assurances by the National Assembly that expedite the process of passing.
Oh, I would like that. But if, by the time the National Assembly even passes it on the 23rd, they're now going to technicalities. You see that you will not conclude this before the election. I'm saying it here on my honor, that issue of 23rd is a delay tactics.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that if it will be enough time, but you've already answered that. There's a statement credited to President Buhari who said that Labour was trying to force his government into printing more money in order to meet their demands. And he has said that he's not going back on this 30,000 naira minimum wage. So is he speaking from both sides of his cheek? And does that cast any doubt on his real intentions?
Well, I think he is, because if you say that maybe Labour or whichever is behaving like a mad woman, who after tying a firewood, she couldn't carry the firewood, and she went ahead to add more firewood on it, apparently arguing that 18,000 wasn't easy to pay, and that we are still demanding for more. And then you turn at another event to say you are going to pay. So one starts to wonder, the best explanation, if not speaking from the same different sides of the mouth. However, this is the election period. And I want to tell you that you don't expect Mr. President to say he will not pay when he knows very well that this is election period. And I think this is critical, even to the governors. If you check comments by governors, those governors who may not be seeking re-election will be adamant that they will pay. Those governors who will be seeking re-election will tell you they will pay, whether they mean it or not. So that's what you are seeing. Some of us are still wondering the position of Mr. President as at today. At one time, he's saying, the money is too much, I can't pay. At another time, he's telling you, I'm committed to it. So what is the position of the president? What's the position of the federal government on this? So that's why almost every Labour leader is on standby, on what the outcome might be.
Let me take you to your last point. You understand, you just said it's a delay tactics and that this is electioneering period. And on your honor, you do know that this will not come into law. But Labour has threatened and said that its workers will not vote for governors who cannot pay. So if this process is not completed before elections, how do you know the governors that will not pay? That's one. Two, your colleagues in the TUC, Trade Union Congress, and the NLC seem to have given the president the time that he needs to transmit this to the National Assembly. In the event that the president doesn't transmit this on the 23rd, as promised, what would you do, the ULC?
We are going to meet again if they fail to transmit it. Even if they transmit it, we are going to meet again to review the situation. But let me say this. There's a snag there that even if they don't pass this, whosoever is going to emerge will have Labour to contend. Assuming they dribble and succeed in conducting an election, whosoever emerges, it's not like when they conduct election, it is over. You know, we have labor to contend. But should we start an action before the election? There will be no election. Those are the two areas. If, for example, they didn't conclude this process and we decide to say, hey, workers, stay in your houses, you know, I doubt whether they will go ahead with the election. And it's not a threat. I'm just giving you a scenario. If they succeed and conduct the election, and we say, hey, this country is... let me remind you, in the 90s, when only Nupeng said no to annulment of June 12, you and I are living witnesses, and that's one of over 50 unions in the country. In as much as we are not thinking of that, I think we should not be, you know, pushed to the wall. You know, we believe in this, the unity of this country, and we have been working. We have shown enough patience, but not to the extent of somebody thinking they are playing on our intelligence. Let us dribble them and conduct the election. After the election, and we say there's no inauguration, or we don't believe in what you are doing, you know, so it doesn't make it easier. So whichever way, the right thing must be done so that Nigeria will move on.
And talking about the right thing, your ULC is a faction of a Labour Congress. Last year, you were not registered. I would like to know what the status of your trade union is now. Do you have the requisite 12 trade unions who are not members of other trade unions?
Well, we have more than 12 unions. Yeah, but I think the politics of registration, I wouldn't see it's alien, you know. Why the issue of registration came into Nigerian Industrial Relations Book is for regulation and for control. You know, in 1977, there were about 4 labor centers in Nigeria, and Obasanjo forced them to be in NLC. You know, gradually the TUC reemerged again, which was part of the old unions, and then the ULC, which was equally part of the old unions, emerged. Like you say, faction, you know, an incident happened, and the ULC came into operation. You know, the issue of registration and control, you know, is what we are battling with. But we have shown that we are an independent union, especially from the private sector. I think I'm saying it on this list that the Nigerian government seems not to be too comfortable with the strength inherent in the unions with the ULC. You know, so, but we have met all the conditions, whether the 12 unions or more, or the centers, or the caliber and capacity of the people involved, you know, and we are recognized, but they have not given us certificate of registration.
Dr. Chris Ngige, Minister for Labour and Employment, was quoted last year as saying that you are not registered, and that means you're not recognized. Even TLC... No,
he can't say we are not recognized.
No, but TUC and NLC last year also said ULC does not have the right to call a strike.
Yeah.
What is your comment on that?
And we called a strike. The heavens didn't fall. And the same Ngige met with us. And even in the negotiation, we are all represented. We have our dealings with them. We have finished. Ngige won't say the ULC is not recognized, but he has refused to release the certificate of registration because maybe they are not too sure whether we are going to be part of extension of government.
Labour is perceived to have compromised and a divided house, and so it has not been able to wield its pressure power in recent times. How much of a bind do the Nigerian populace have into the struggle?
Well, I think that assumption is not true. If you watch this issue of minimum wage, you know, we seem to have dropped all other considerations to work for the interests of Nigerian workers. I'm not sure that that unity is lacking, except that the approach and our orientation differ. And if you watch the history of the labor movement, even in 1988, you know, there was this ideological conflict. The ones that belong to the left, the ones that belong to the right. It still manifests till tomorrow, but that doesn't mean that the interest of the Nigerian worker is lacking. On this issue of minimum wage, I pray it doesn't get to a certain level. If it gets to a certain level, you will see the unity of purpose of the Nigerian workers. You know, whether ULC, whether registered, not registered, whether NLC or TUC, everybody is committed to the interests of the working masses of this country. So, and with our traditional allies, the civil society, we have not, there is no problem with them till tomorrow.
But you say that now because it's the issue of wage, and ULC seem to have sided with NLC and TUC. 2 years back, the strike for petroleum subsidy, petrol price hike, you sided with the government, and that protest did not take effect because it was a divided house.
No.
It was ineffective because you seem to have chosen which fight or which battle to choose.
Yeah. You see, those are part of the circumstances of our existence as a movement.
You didn't think that the NLC and the TUC at that time had a battle, a right one for the Nigerian population?
No, they had a battle, and they said they are not going to the battle with me. And I said, okay, I'm not with you. And that ended it.
Why? Why were you not with them?
Well, because the NLC had fixed a date for strike. And they didn't have the courtesy to say, let all the unions. And bear in mind, the issues at stake then were either electricity tariff and petroleum price. And the two unions concerned are with me, NUPENG and the electricity union. And then the NLC decides to meet with government, several meetings to go, and decided on a day for strike. And I went for a meeting with them, and I'm saying this on tele, you know, and when they saw me, Ayuba Waba and others said they will not meet, that I will not be in their meeting. I said, okay, I'm not part of you. I moved out. Their colleagues who were there at the press say, why are you not with them? I say, I'm not with them. You know, I don't know what I do. That this strike is dead on arrival. You can't call a strike on a Wednesday, and you are calling meeting of your people on a Tuesday. Before they get back to their stations, you know, the meeting would have been over. And I'm not aware, I have not called for action. So that was my involvement at that point. And the rest is history. But we have learned from that. What you are seeing now, so that we have learned from that. We meet a lot, we talk a lot before all that is happening. And I'm sure with that lesson, every one of us who have realized that you can't go it alone. I think that was what happened then, not because anybody was supporting the increase in pump price of petroleum products.
Will you then describe your union, the United Labour Congress, as legitimate if you don't have an operational certificate?
Well, the unions make up the center. All the unions there are all licensed. They all are registered. If you have 20 unions there, they have their registers. So the center is just an assembly where we come together to federate. So there's no union there that is illegal. See, tomorrow. And having met up with the conditions stated by the government, 12 unions as a minimum, we hold our conferences, elect our officers, you know, have our secretariat, functional secretariat. We came into existence, and the law says...
Unions that don't belong to other trade unions.
Yes. Now, if you go into that analysis you are doing, it then means that if you're a Catholic, you can't live and enter Pentecostal. It infringes on the fundamental human rights and Section 40 of the Nigerian Constitution that if I belong to, if I'm a Catholic, I can't be a Pentecostal. That right, nobody can enforce it in this country. That if you're a member of this NLC, until you die, you can't go to TUC. Such rights, such law does not exist anywhere in the world. So when people put it like as you are putting, if you have not belonged to, you know, I look at it as it doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist. And I want anybody to put it that if you are a member of Mountain of Fire until you die, or if you're a member of APC, you can't go to PDP. And they're changing on daily basis. And all of them are formed under Section 40, right to belong to trade union, to belong to religion of your choice, to belong to political party of your choice. So why would somebody tell me that I would die in NLC? It doesn't follow. So having done that, I have the right to move in or go out. Having done that, including the new ones, we are moving on. The law says you can go ahead and operate, you know, after meeting all these conditions. And we have followed the law.
Now, in addition to being president of ULC, you're also Secretary General of the Nigerian Union for Electricity Employers.
Correct.
A position you've held for over a decade.
Correct.
Now, you stood in strong opposition to the privatization of the power sector by the Nigerian government, and you urge your workers to shut down power stations and what have you. So what is your current stance now that the power sector has been privatized?
Well, the power sector has been privatized, and Nigerians are witnessing it today. You know, that's the worst privatization exercise that ever took place the world. And I'm still standing. When they were privatizing, I made one comment that Nigerians will talk last. Because we privatize without anything in place. The three basics for privatization anywhere: you must have the managerial ability, the technical competence, and there must be FDI, foreign direct investment. None was present before we privatized. And after privatization, there is no $1 that has entered the economy of this country based on that privatization. People went to Nigerian banks and collected loans to buy Nigerian electricity sector. And that's why we are where we are. None of them has any experience, either 2 years or 3 years, in management of electricity industry. No country has just sold its own power sector like Nigeria. Check all over the world, there's what we call base power. The 4,000 megawatts they privatized should have at most been a Nigeria base power, still under the control of the government. And after deregulation, many companies came in. Why can't you generate your own to meet with the 4,000 megawatts? The United States, the headquarters of capitalism, still has about 250,000 megawatts controlled by the state, federal, municipal, whatever. And they now allow the private sector to generate the excess. So that if the investors conspire to deal with the state, they can use that base power to give electricity to hospitals, where you have armories, schools, and all those social facilities. In Nigeria today, if you don't increase tariff, and they have started a union of the investors, if you don't increase tariff to their tune, they will shut down electricity. They have such powers because there's no power under the control of the government. And pre-industrialization, you can't hand over electricity to the private sector because they will hold you to ransom. It is only post, assuming you have 24-hour supply of electricity, you can now talk of who manages it. But here in Nigeria, you have taken the core, the fabrics. Today, tariff is increasing. People are paying for darkness, and nobody seems to be saying anything about it. I am justified more than that, and I will stand against that till the end of time. You privatize electricity without even ascertaining the measure. Go to the market, you buy Gary, there's a cup to measure it. You don't have prepaid meters, you don't have any meter, and you leave it to the vagaries of the market, and Nigerians are suffering. The role I played 10 years ago is justified, and I still stand by it today.
But the federal government still operates that base power. They still manage power stations, the federal government.
They don't.
NIPPs?
They build NIPPs, sell it.
But they own them.
I said they build it and sell it. Tell me the NIPP that the federal government is managing.
They haven't been sold.
They have.
Okay. But,
they have.
But
there is no private power station now, except they have not completed the building. When they finish constructing, they sell it to the private sector. That's what they're saying.
They're still owned by the federal government.
I'm saying no. I'm saying that it is only the transmission company that is still under government control. At a certain stage, they tried management contract, which they gave to Manitoba. And for your information, Manitoba in Canada is owned by a local government, just like Osho, the local government. That was the people that Nigerian government brought to manage their transmission. It wasn't still a private sector, a private company, before it was brought back, to Nigerians. So generation companies, distribution companies have been given to the private sector. Even in the case of distribution companies, that government still controls 40%. Government handed over 100% after selling 60%. That is why no DISCO has declared any profit for government for its 40%. So it is a ruse. That's the most fraudulent practice in this world, the privatization in the electricity sector. And Ajaero, I stand by the fact that we have to review it. The 5 years they have in the MOU to review it has expired. And they have overstayed. Up to now, nobody is asking questions. It's a situation whereby the seller is equally the buyer. I challenge them to come out to tell us who are the owners of these companies.
Let's find out now if electricity generation, transmission, and distribution has improved under this privatization scheme.
Okay. I don't think they have improved. You are still battling under 4,000 megawatts. After the NIPPs, at the stage, over 11 billion naira was spent by the $11 billion by Jonathan administration to build the NIPPs. The whole essence is to increase power beyond 4,000 megawatts. And if you have $11 billion and the country is in a virgin position, you can have 11,000 megawatts. you can have $1 billion for 1,000 megawatts of electricity. Now, even after spending that, and the almost $16 billion spent by President Obasanjo, we are still on 4,000 megawatts. When Obasanjo came, under Lili Moka as chairman of the technical committee, they were able to meet up with even the same 4,000 megawatts by repairing the power plants without building a new one. Now, between that time and now, we are still talking of 4,000 megawatts. You will discover that if you don't have any conscious master plan and you have 4,000 megawatts this year, by next year, if you have 4,000 megawatts, it will reduce. The hours you receive in your house will reduce because more gadgets have come in. More houses have been constructed. More people are now taking the 4,000 megawatts. So it's not something that should be constant. On yearly basis, you should have either 500 megawatts or 1,000 megawatts to meet up with the demand. The demand is not constant. So that is why to return it at 4,000 megawatts between that time and now shows you the level at which we are deteriorating. So it has not improved, and people are paying more.
Are you disputing the current figures by the Minister of Power Works and Housing, who reiterates that it is 7,000 megawatts we are generating?
No, generated power is not the same thing as distributed power.
Okay.
I'm telling you this, it's not the power wheeled out. If you generate 7,000 megawatts and it doesn't get to the houses, that is, you are generating capacity. It is not the distributed capacity.
Even distribution, it's above 4,000 megawatts, according to him.
No.
He says it's about 5,000 megawatts.
No, leave that alone. Take politics out of what we are saying. Now, even the wheeling power, you can, if you generate 7,000 megawatts, your transmission must have the capacity of wheeling out 7,000 megawatts. Your distribution, the same thing. Mention the number of transformers that are functioning in this country. The new investors that took over have not replaced a single transformer. And based on the capacity of transformers, even when you have 10,000 megawatts, you may be distributing 1,000 megawatts. Besides, based on the economic of power economies that the new investors are playing, if you give a Bini, for instance, 500 megawatts, they will say no, they need 200 megawatts. I'm saying this because they are rejecting load. Why are they saying that? If they take 500 megawatts, they may be paying 1 billion to the market. And then by the time you give them 200, maybe they pay 400 million to the market. At the end of the month, they will still charge based on estimated billing. They will still make more than 1 billion and then pay to the market because nobody is moderating them. Since billing is estimated, so they will get little and still make their maximum profit. So that is what is happening with all these, investors. All of them, they are rejecting load. So at what point will now, even when you have little power and they are rejecting to dispute, at what point will you now have an improved power in the country?
Talking about improved power, we have unutilized capacity of about 11,000 megawatts, and yet the transmission has not been upgraded. And we cannot transmit it ourselves. The federal government still transmits it.
Yeah, I think the problem is not transmission. The transmission as at today, by my own finding, has capacity to wheel out 7,000 megawatts. If you have 7,000 megawatts today wheeled out, there will be improvement in the country. But when you wheel out 7,000 megawatts and the distribution point, which is the last point, the transformers, all of them are not functioning, you have a lot of wastages. A lot of them will trip off, based on fault here and there. Now, we have to be at par. If we are generating 4,000 megawatts, transmission must be 4,000 megawatts, the distribution must be 4,000 megawatts. But there's a problem even, because the distribution collects money. That's the point, that collect money. They are not even paying the transmission and the generation. Because that's the chain, and that was what led to the merger of Niger Dam Authority and the Electricity Corporation of Nigeria in the early 70s. Because one point is at the point of collecting money. When they collect money, they satisfy themselves. What is supposed to be paid to the generation and transmission, they don't pay. And those ones are crying. Go and find out from the system how much they're owing Transmission Company of Nigeria, how much they're owing the generating companies. Because one person is collecting, and they must take care of it, and they now pay whatever they like, not what the market demands. So these are part of the conflict we have in the system now. And if the transmission doesn't get their money, generation doesn't get their money, what would they use to reinvest?
Well, what you just said is arguable, because you just said what we have is 7,000, and the information system operation says that we have never attained above 5,000 megawatts. So it's very
I say
debatable.
we have 7,000 capacity to transmit.
Okay.
So it's what you feed into it. The transmission stations have been prepared that if you bring 7,000 megawatts, they can transmit it. That's what I said. But I remember I equally said that these people are generating 4,000. You know, when you talked about the minister saying they have 5,000, whatever, I'm still doubting the generating capacity, you know, so far. So how much is we generating? How much is Shiro, Delta that they gave to all these people? How much are they generating?
There are those who will argue that the workers in the system are better paid than they were under the federal government, because you totally discredit the privatization process and system. They said the workers get their pays as when due, they're better paid, entitlements. What do you have to say to that?
In the power sector?
Yes.
No, there's never been improved salary payment in the power sector. And they are working on that terrible condition. When I say terrible condition, apart from maybe Ibadan, Abuja, maybe one or two other places, others don't have condition of service. And that's why you hear my problem with them on a daily basis. They don't believe in condition of service. They believe in slave wage. You know, these new people you are seeing, you know, they have refused to agree on condition of service, talk less of having increase in salary and wages. They are not doing it. They are sacking people at will. The number of accidents, the number of electrocution has more than tripled since these people who don't know their work came into office. So the situation has been worse. You know, it is not better. Under the federal government system, that they are not even posting profit. Everybody was entitled to his own salary, at least was entitled to promotion as at when due. These ones are not.
Well, let's not throw you under the bus for too much longer. Comrade Joe Ajaero, President, United Labour Congress, would like to thank you for joining us on the morning show.
Thank you all. Thank you all.